Hi, I'm Dr. Shiva Guide. I'm a clinical psychologist specialized in PTSD, trauma and anxiety and mood disorders. I'm here with Taylor Winston. We are both survivors of the Las Vegas massacre that occurred on October 1st, 2017. We've been putting together a series of videos to help all of you, whether you were a Route 91 survivor or a survivor of another traumatic experience. We hope that either through documents online if you like to read, or through videos if you prefer to watch, that you will have a better understanding of trauma and PTSD and all of the things that tend to become problematic when you've experienced trauma. So, you heard of Pavlov before?
I believe when I was in high school I learned about something about dogs, for how they get trained and they get accustomed to hearing or smelling something.
Right. So, you know, it's funny because my patients are always really surprised when I start talking about Pavlov and his dogs, because I guess their thought might be, I don't want to mind read, but I'm guessing their thought is, what do dogs have to do with PTSD and us? And I will say everything. And it's not just PTSD, but other anxiety disorders as well, other kinds of mood states as well. So when we talk about classical conditioning, Pavlov was a scientist, very well known in the field, and he ran some experiments on dogs. I'm going to sort of bring it home to us and make it very, very highly relevant using examples from the Las Vegas shooting, and you can help me out with that, yeah, Taylor, since we were both there. And I hope that all of you will have a much better understanding of how PTSD develops, but more importantly, how it can be healed and how you can recover from trauma. Just because you've been through a traumatic experience does not mean you will develop PTSD. And I want to remind all of you, a majority of people who have experienced trauma do recover. Natural recovery is in fact the most common outcome, and a much smaller percentage of people develop PTSD. So we have to think about, well, what makes that group of people especially susceptible? And some of that can be pre-existing mental health or mental illness, biological, genetic, also how many resources you have, how many protective factors, how resilient you are, and we know that things like optimism have been linked to increased resilience. So back to the topic for the day. So let's talk about classical conditioning. So this is a model that talks about how we learn things. And when we talk about conditioned learning or unconditioned learning, I want you to think, when you hear the word conditioned, I want you to think learned, okay? And unconditioned, what would that mean?
Unlearned.
Exactly.
Which I don't think is grammatically correct.
It is for us. We're going to go with it. I think it is. Okay, so the way this works, you remember in the last video that we talked about that I went into the science of what your brain is doing when the bullets are coming towards us, and then your midbrain's getting in.
And your headquarters is telling your scribe to take notes and sending signals elsewhere.
Exactly, and your command center is like, okay, let's send everything up to the corporate office, but just in case this is actually a saber-toothed tiger, right, or these are bullets, not fireworks, let's just make sure that we send that message out, and it gets the whole body involved, right? So think about how tired you are after you've had a fight, flight, freeze response. Okay, so here's what's happening in terms of our learning. So now we're getting into, remember when we talked about how trauma is a psychological injury that impacts us biologically? So we talked about the biology in that last video, but now we're going to talk about how and why it impacts our cognitions and our emotions. So here's the explanation. So bullets were coming in, we were taking fire, right? And I think most of us would argue that there really was no fight, was there?
No.
Yeah. So we are going to call this the unconditioned stimulus. What does that mean?
Us.
Unconditioned? Well, actually, the unconditioned stimulus, we're going to think unlearned. And that, for us, was the bullets, right? Yeah. So that was our version of the lion, okay, the saber-toothed tiger, if we're going to sort of get back to evolutionary roots. And the unconditioned stimulus will always, 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 always lead to what response? Do you remember?
fight, flight, freeze.
Exactly. And that is what we call the unconditioned response. That is your fight, flight, freeze response. So did we have to learn that?
Nope, that is built into our system.
That is hardwired into our boards at birth. Okay, so this is happening, right? This was happening. We didn't see it coming. Well, remember the hippocampus that's taking notes?
Yep.
It's taking notes, and it's starting to observe everything that was in the environment. So let's start, you and me. Let's put together a list of everything we were both observing, hearing, seeing that night. First of all, Las Vegas, right?
Las Vegas.
Okay.
Country concert.
So country concert.
Lights.
Lights.
Fireworks.
Yeah, and if you, I want you to think about this because these all end up being something we call triggers. They are environmental cues that ultimately can make us very, very sick. And if we learn to not react to them, then we have a chance at recovery. What are some other things?
Fireworks.
So lights and maybe, okay, so we'll say noises.
Maybe, yeah, the umbrellas, noises, blood.
Blood.
Maybe even
I know high rises. I know a lot of folks in our group that we've been running here. High rises, those
just events
tall
in
glass.
general.
Yep, and tall, so glassy buildings, right? Tall glass buildings. And then other concerts. Crowds, right? What were people doing that night?
Just drinking and having a good time, and then everything
And then
turned
screaming.
into
Yeah.
screaming and chaos.
Absolutely. And then some of the things you might have noticed was helicopters, right?
Yep.
Because I know these are triggering to a lot of people. Yep. Helicopters, ambulances, police officers.
The sounds of bullets, which I guess go in with fireworks.
The noises, right? And that can be anything like that, right? What about cowboy boots? Did you remember seeing all those posts after the shooting and people didn't want to wear their cowboy boots?
Yep. A lot of people don't want to wear anything from that night.
Maybe even listen to Jason Aldean, right?
Yep.
I know that some folks would turn off the radio when they heard the songs that he was singing around the sort of circa.
I actually have my boots on from that night right now.
I love that. Yeah, I call them my boots, my lucky boots. I put my wristband from that night on the side of them. Those boots saved our lives, right?
Yep.
So this is what the hippocampus is taking notes of, right? And that ARC protein is being released and ensuring that all of this goes into long-term storage. And why would we want to take notes on all this stuff, Taylor?
Just in case something of this nature happens again, we can at least have a better understanding and maybe react in a different way.
Exactly. So if this was unlearned, because it's unconditioned, then what do you think we call all of these things?
Stumped. What is it? Classical.
Conditioned.
Conditioned.
Right? Because conditioned means learned. So these are unlearned because bullets, you don't need to know to run or hide or freeze to bullets. But I mean, before this concert, well, depending on your military experience or not, but did crowds or helicopters or noises or cowboy boots necessarily reminded you?
No,
you know, another one?
Never did.
I'll tell you what, I've spent more time in the past year thinking about fake turf than I have in a lifetime, right? Because fake turf was where I was standing up by the stage on the Mandalay Bay side. And when after the shooting stopped and my friends and I were running, the first thing I noticed was an enormous pool of blood, and I blocked out everything for a few seconds after that. All the bodies, all the things we were running and maneuvering around. And so fake turf is just embedded in my memory. And so these things can trigger memories, and every time I see fake turf, I think of Las Vegas. But fake turf, does that have anything? It's everywhere, especially in California, right? Because we are going through a chronic drought. So this is conditioned stimuli. These are your now conditioned, learned stimuli that have all latched onto the unconditioned stimuli. And what's the problem with that? Well, here's the problem. is that each and every one of these has the potential for causing something we call a conditioned response. What do you think a conditioned response sounds like?
Exactly what we're seeing here. Any one of those?
Exactly. So fight, flight, freeze is the response we have. Guess what we call them? Panic attacks.
Panic attacks.
Panic attacks. Panic attacks. That's what we
Thanks
call
for
them.
helping me, TikTok.
You knew it. So panic attacks, and they are essentially, and we'll talk more about it in the video on anxiety and panic, but panic attacks are essentially our body going through a fight, flight, freeze response. And then this is not a great deal, because when you're having panic attacks all the time, now every time you go out and you see any of these things, you have a panic attack because your anxiety goes up. So then what's the behavior people want to do?
Avoid.
Avoid. Nice job, Taylor. You've been listening. So people want to avoid. And when you start avoiding all the things you love, how does that make you feel?
Not very good.
Yeah. You think it might make you depressed?
Yeah. I mean, recently we had Jason Aldean in town, and I think a lot of people tried to listen to coming to your sessions here, but a lot of people probably avoided going, and they still probably are.
Yeah, I can only imagine. People are still working on this avoidance thing. And the problem is, when you have anxiety and you tend to avoid for any amount of time, ultimately it will negatively impact your mood, and you will probably see your mood decline. And then we see depression, and then when people are depressed, they want to isolate, right? At the end of the day, whether you're avoiding or isolating, in some cases, they could look exactly the same, right? And then we get angry, a lot of anger, and we'll talk more about that. And anger tends to alienate us from other people. And so this can become very, very problematic, right? So we have an anxiety, and then we avoid, and then our mood starts to go down, and then we isolate, and then we are angry, 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 and we alienate. And it starts to get really messy. So does this look like a really good bang for the buck?
No.
Not really, right? So this is a really important concept. The way that PTSD develops is this, because people end up coming in because they feel like this, right? Yeah. So how do you think we might fix this problem? What do you think needs to happen as you look at this?
Well, from learning everything from our groups is just, rule 5, fuck feelings.
Right. So we're going to go be around these things.
If you don't want to wear your cowboy boots from that night, then you put them on and
put them on anyway.
I'm still personally, having difficulties with a lot of things on the list, but I'm trying to apply myself and hopefully can overcome some of them. It's going to take a long time, and I'm sure a lot of people are dealing with a lot of the same things.
Absolutely.
But, everyone's going to heal at their own pace.
Absolutely. So kind of the quick way, and we'll wrap this up, is that we want to sever all of these things to this, because we will always have an unconditioned and unlearned response when we are truly in danger. But we don't want to walk around everywhere always having these responses that are identical to seeing the saber-toothed tiger.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. And the problem is also this: your brain can only focus on so much when you are in a life-threatening situation, and it will focus on what it believes to be most relevant. When you are too distracted by all of these other things, it could actually put you at risk. This is why we have to learn to maintain this thing called discrimination.
Well, how do you start teaching yourself to discriminate or leave these out of something that's attached to an unconditioned stimulus?
It's a great question, Taylor. The bottom line is, if we want this to go away, if we want all those conditioned responses to go away, those learned responses, we have to make all of these conditioned stimuli go away. That means we put our cowboy boots on. We go into amusement parks and we hang out, right? A few times a week we do these kinds of activities for an hour minimum with no safety objects. We'll talk more about that. We go and hang out around crowds where we feel vulnerable, where we feel scared, and we do it anyway. We don't run away when we see helicopters or ambulances or police officers or police cars. We sit with them. We go talk to them. We actually sit with it, in it, through it, right? And it's not avoid. We go back to Vegas. We listen to Jason Aldean. We go back to a concert. We I know one thing that was triggering when I was the first few months was lights, right? So I'd come here to In Cahoots, they'd be flashing lights, especially on the weekends, and I'd find myself standing in the middle of the dance floor sobbing, right? Or stepping off because I didn't want to trip anybody because I was discombobulated, right? And sobbing. And I stayed anyway. Even though I felt detached, I didn't feel like I was enjoying it as much as I used to. And Taylor, you know how much I love to dance,
Yep.
right? You're often on the dance floor dancing next to me. So it's just really important to go out and do these things anyway. It means blood. You know, a lot of folks that I've treated that have been in combat, they avoid hospitals. They avoid getting their blood drawn. They avoid anything that, even Halloween. Halloween is coming up, and that was a really difficult time of year for me last year because of just all of the sort of bloody decorations for Halloween, and very triggering for me. It means we don't avoid. We still go out for Halloween, and we don't go to a venue and stay off the fake turf. We in fact go stand on the fake turf, especially if that was something that triggered you. So that's how we get rid of all these attachments.
Yep.
And that is ultimately what is going to help us discriminate between real danger and perceived danger, which is non-danger. Okay, so that's kind of the bottom line.
It's gonna be tougher than it sounds.
It sure is.
So.
Yeah, it sure is. Does it help to understand it?
It's a good, at least, you know, educational value, just knowing about it and how we can at least try to start moving in a positive direction.
Absolutely, and that's exactly the point, Taylor. I mean, the reason that I teach this with my own patients during the week, and I really wanted people in the community to understand, is that when you look at this and you understand how PTSD and other anxiety disorders that are more chronic develop and how they're maintained, then you see that this is within your power. It's within your reach to change it. And that's really important because these things are highly treatable. It's just about forcing yourself, and using my bucket rules can help you do that, but forcing yourself to get these things done so that you no longer associate them with bullets, because the truth is bullets can show up anywhere, right? This was just the set of circumstances.
And I still avoid a lot of the things, but after coming for nearly a year and spending a lot of time with you, I at least understand it. So
yeah, and I think that it starts with understanding. So I hope this has been helpful for you, Taylor, and I hope that it will be very helpful to the rest of you. So what we spent this video and this session talking about is this idea of how PTSD and some of the more chronic anxiety issues develop, and also how we can fix them. In my groups, when I teach my patients, we talk about the fear hierarchy. I like to call it the shit we don't like to do list, or the shit we avoid list. And we just write down all the things that we avoid and we start doing them, starting usually from the bottom up, although you can do the 10 out of 10, which is a more what we would call flooding, but they're all effective. So thank you for tuning in, and we hope that you learned something.